In the summer of 216 BCE, one of the most epic and decisive conflicts of ancient history began. The Second Punic War, a titanic confrontation between Rome and Carthage. Born from Carthage's deep resentment following its defeat in the First Punic War, this war plunged the Roman Republic into one of its darkest days. On the plains of Cannae, two colossal armies clashed, leaving a legacy that would alter the course of the war and forever etch the name of Hannibal Barca into history. At the heart of this conflict stood Hannibal Barca, a Carthaginian commander whose audacity and military genius earned him a place among history's most legendary strategists. According to tradition, Hannibal's path was sealed in childhood when his father, Hamilcar Barca, demanded an oath of eternal hatred against Rome. At just 9 years old, Hannibal stood before a sacred altar and vowed to dedicate his life to fighting the enemy that had humiliated his homeland. True to his promise, Hannibal embarked on one of history's most extraordinary campaigns. Leading his army on a daring march across the Alps, he caught the Romans off guard and unleashed chaos throughout Italy, cementing his reputation as a master tactician and a relentless foe of Rome. On the Roman side, the consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro stood out as key figures in the fateful year of 216 BCE. Tasked with leading a colossal army to confront Hannibal on the plains of Cannae, they brought contrasting approaches to the battlefield. Aemilius Paulus, a cautious and experienced veteran, embodied prudence and calculated strategy. Varro, in contrast, was impulsive and overconfident, reflecting Rome's eagerness to crush its enemy at any cost. This mix of ambition, rivalry, and clashing strategies set the stage for one of antiquity's most devastating battles, a confrontation that would not only determine the fate of both armies, but also shape the future of two mighty empires. Setting the stage, the First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE. To understand the stakes at Cannae, we must first revisit the First Punic War, the initial great conflict between Rome and Carthage. These two rising powers battled for dominance over the Western Mediterranean, with Sicily as the main prize. The spark, control of Sicily. The war began over control of the island, a crucial hub for trade and military power. Rome supported the Mamertines, a group of mercenaries who sought help against the Carthaginians and Syracusans. Clashing interests. Carthage, with its formidable naval presence and stronghold on Sicily, was a dominant maritime power. Meanwhile, Rome, primarily a land-based force, sought to extend its influence beyond the Italian peninsula. During the First Punic War, Rome's disciplined legions excelled in land combat, capturing key cities like Agrigentum. Initially, Carthage maintained dominance at sea, leveraging its powerful fleet and superior maritime experience. However, Rome adapted quickly. By capturing Carthaginian ships, they studied their technology and built their own navy, introducing the innovative corvus, a movable boarding bridge that turned naval battles into infantry skirmishes, playing to Roman strengths. Turning the tide, the Battle of the Aegates Islands, 241 BCE. The decisive moment came at the Battle of the Aegates Islands, where Rome annihilated much of the Carthaginian fleet. This victory secured Rome's control over the seas and forced Carthage to negotiate peace. Years of grueling campaigns and immense costs left Carthage economically and militarily weakened. Consequences of the First Punic War. Rome's victory. Carthage ceded Sicily, Corsica, and Sardinia to Rome, paid a massive indemnity, and lost its influence over the Western Mediterranean. Carthage's humiliation. The loss of territory and prestige ignited a desire for revenge, particularly in leaders like Hamilcar Barca and his son Hannibal, who harbored deep resentment toward Rome. A prelude to greater conflict. The First Punic War marked Rome's emergence as a dominant Mediterranean power and left Carthage vulnerable. This vulnerability, coupled with a simmering hatred for Rome, planted the seeds for the outbreak of the Second Punic War, a conflict that would see the rise of Hannibal and culminate in epic battles like Cannae. The stage was set for a renewed clash, as Carthage prepared to reclaim its honor and Rome sought to solidify its burgeoning empire. In 218 BCE, Hannibal Barca undertook one of the most audacious feats in military history, crossing the Alps to invade Italy from the north, defying all Roman expectations. With an army of approximately 50,000 soldiers, 9,000 cavalry, and nearly 37 war elephants, Hannibal faced treacherous, snow-covered terrain and persistent attacks from local tribes. Despite severe losses due to the harsh conditions, Hannibal emerged on the Italian side with a force strong enough to pose a significant threat to Rome from an unexpected direction. His bold maneuver not only stunned the Romans, but also won him the allegiance of several Gallic tribes in northern Italy, eager to oppose Rome. The foundations of future glory, Trebia and Trasimene. Hannibal's arrival in Italy marked the beginning of a series of tactical masterpieces, starting with the Battle of the Trebia River, 218 BCE. Employing deception and strategic cunning, he lured the Roman army, commanded by Consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, into crossing the freezing Trebia River. The exhausted Roman soldiers, disorganized and vulnerable, were ambushed by Hannibal's cavalry and hidden infantry forces. This calculated attack resulted in a devastating Roman defeat, bolstering Hannibal's position in Italy. The brilliance of Hannibal's strategy was further showcased at the Battle of Lake Trasimene, 217 BC. In one of the most successful ambushes in military history, Hannibal concealed his troops in the hills surrounding the narrow pass by the lake. As the Roman army under Gaius Flaminius marched unsuspectingly through the defile, Hannibal's forces launched a perfectly coordinated surprise attack. The Romans were either annihilated or driven into the lake to their deaths, leaving no chance for retreat. These victories not only demonstrated Hannibal's unparalleled tactical genius, but also dealt severe blows to Roman morale, setting the stage for even greater confrontations, including the legendary Battle of Cannae. Defeats at Trebia and Lake Trasimene left Rome in a state of panic. The Senate appointed Fabius Maximus as dictator, who adopted a strategy of attrition to avoid direct confrontations with Hannibal. However, this tactic, although effective, was perceived as cowardice by many Romans. In 216 BC, Rome decided to abandon Fabius's strategy and confront Hannibal directly with a massive army. Under the joint command of consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, Rome gathered nearly 90,000 soldiers, the largest army they had mobilized up to that point. Hannibal, on the other hand, commanded around 50,000 men, placing him at a clear numerical disadvantage. Despite this disadvantage, Hannibal was prepared to employ his strategic genius in what would become one of the most iconic battles in ancient history, the Battle of Cannae. Up to this point, we have reviewed the steps, actions, and outcomes. Now let's focus on the current battlefield, as everything is about to unfold. The Battle of Cannae took place on a vast plain near the river Aufidus, now called Ofanto, in the region of Apulia, southeast Italy. This setting played a crucial role in the battle's outcome, as Hannibal carefully chose this terrain to maximize his army's advantages and counter the numerical superiority of the Romans. The characteristics of the terrain are as follows. 1. A vast plain. The plain of Cannae offered an extensive, open space, ideal for maneuvering large armies. While it favored the deployment of the Roman legions, it also provided ample room for Hannibal to use encirclement tactics effectively. 2. Proximity to the river Aufidus. The river served as a vital water source, especially during the summer heat. Hannibal positioned his camp near the river, ensuring access for his troops while forcing the Romans to take a less favorable, dry, and dusty position. This pre-combat setup wore down the Roman soldiers even before the battle began. 3. Wind and dust. During the battle, the wind blew from the direction of the river towards the Roman army, stirring up dust that hampered visibility. Hannibal calculated this natural factor to disorient his enemies, showcasing his integration of environmental elements into his strategy. Hannibal, aware of his numerical inferiority, knew that a direct confrontation on neutral ground would disadvantage him. Therefore, he chose the plain of Cannae because it offered ideal conditions for implementing an enveloping strategy and neutralizing the brute force of the Roman legions. Hannibal positioned his army, so that the Romans, confident in their superiority, would believe they could easily crush the Carthaginian forces. He placed his camp in a visible location to provoke the Romans into attacking. Hannibal organized his battle line with a weaker central formation made up of light infantry, while positioning his most disciplined and experienced troops on the flanks. The vastness of the plain allowed his cavalry to operate freely, a decisive element in the battle. The plain allowed Hannibal's heavy cavalry and elephants to maneuver effectively. Moreover, the presence of the river and the climatic conditions played in his favor, demonstrating that he not only planned military tactics, but also considered environmental details. Now, let's examine the preparations and deployments by both sides before the confrontation. The classic Roman tactical formation, known as the triplex aces, involved organizing soldiers into three main lines of infantry, each with specific roles. 1. First line, the hastati, were young, relatively inexperienced soldiers armed with spears and large shields, whose function was to absorb the initial impact of combat and wear down the enemy. 2. Second line, the principes, were the more experienced soldiers equipped with swords and shields, tasked with sustaining the fight after the initial wear and tear. 3. Third line, the triarii, the most veteran soldiers, reserved for critical situations, served as a last resort reinforcement if the first lines faltered. In addition to these three lines, the Roman flanks were protected by their cavalry, while light troops, velites, were deployed at the front to harass the enemy before the main engagement. At Cannae, the consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro made a significant modification to the classic deployment, concentrating the bulk of their forces into a compact central block. The reason for this modification was their belief that the overwhelming Roman numerical superiority would allow them to quickly break through the center of the Carthaginian lines. However, the problems associated with this change included reduced maneuverability of the legions. But let's not jump ahead and continue. Hannibal Barca deployed his forces innovatively and strategically, designing a formation specifically to counter the Roman numerical superiority and exploit the weaknesses of their compact formation. This disposition aimed to envelop the Roman army and annihilate it. The Carthaginian troop deployment was as follows. 1. Light infantry at the center. Strategic bait. Hannibal placed the light infantry in the center of his battle line, composed mainly of allied Gauls and Iberians. These units were less experienced and poorly equipped compared to other parts of his army, but their role was to attract the primary attack from the Romans. The center was arranged in a convex arc, designed to gradually retreat under Roman pressure, giving the appearance that the legions were gaining ground. 2. Veteran infantry on the flanks of the center. On both sides of the light infantry, Hannibal positioned his most experienced troops, including veteran Carthaginians and Africans armed with captured equipment from previous battles. These forces were prepared to hold the line and maintain cohesion while the center appeared to falter. 3. Cavalry on the flanks. Key to success, Hannibal deployed his heavy Numidian cavalry on the right flank and the Carthaginian heavy cavalry on the left flank. The Numidian cavalry, known for their speed and tactical prowess, were tasked with harassing the Roman cavalry and keeping them engaged. 4. Strategic reserves. Behind the light infantry, Hannibal had additional units in reserve, ready to reinforce either the flanks or the center as needed, ensuring that his lines remained functional throughout the prolonged combat. The opening maneuver of Hannibal. On the morning of August 2nd, 216 BC, the scorching Italian summer heat graced the vast plain of Cannae as two colossal armies faced each other. On one side, the massive and confident Roman legions were organized into a compact formation that appeared unstoppable. On the other, the Carthaginian forces, smaller but led by a commander whose strategic mind would change the course of history. From the very beginning, Hannibal had a clear objective: to lure the Romans toward the center of his formation and exploit it as a deadly trap. With each calculated decision, the Carthaginian general guided the opening of the battle like a master moves pieces on a chessboard. Hannibal's initial maneuver depended on his light infantry, placed at the center of his battle line. This group consisted mainly of Iberian and Gallic soldiers, who were less equipped and trained than the rest of the army. However, Hannibal had not placed them there as mere cannon fodder. Rather, they were the first step in his brilliant plan. As the war horn sounded, the Carthaginian light infantry advanced toward the Roman lines, a move that seemed to defy all logic. How could these weaker troops face the disciplined and powerful legions head-on? But this advance was not a desperate attack. It was a carefully designed bait to awaken the Romans' confidence and momentum. When the first Roman ranks clashed with the Carthaginian center, the light infantry held their ground just long enough to simulate a serious confrontation. Roman soldiers, buoyed by the apparent fragility of the enemy, intensified their assault. The dense and compact ranks of the legions began to push forward with all their might, like a human battering ram. Then something unexpected happened. The Carthaginian infantry began to retreat. But this was not a disordered flight or a sign of weakness. It was a meticulous, synchronized withdrawal. The soldiers retreated step by step, maintaining their formation and drawing the Romans further and further into the trap that Hannibal had meticulously set. This maneuver had a profound impact on the Roman mindset. For consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, it seemed their plan was working. Their troops were advancing successfully, and the Carthaginian line appeared to crumble before them. This perception of impending victory pushed the legions to concentrate even more force on the center, accelerating their advance. However, this very movement was leading them deeper into the heart of the battlefield, where Hannibal's trap awaited to close. The concentration of the legions in the center made the Roman flanks increasingly vulnerable, a critical mistake that Hannibal was about to exploit with his next masterful move. After drawing the Roman legions toward the center of the battlefield with his calculated retreat, Hannibal Barca gave the signal for the next phase of his master plan, the enveloping maneuver. Here, the Carthaginian cavalry, led by the brilliant general Hasdrubal, would play a crucial role. Within hours, the compact and seemingly invincible formation of the Roman army would transform into a bloody chaos. From the start of the battle, Hasdrubal commanded the Carthaginian heavy cavalry on the left flank, while the Numidian light cavalry operated on the right flank. On the left flank, the Carthaginian heavy cavalry clashed directly with the Roman allied cavalry, which was less disciplined and equipped. Within minutes, the Carthaginian cavalry achieved a decisive victory, dispersing the Roman forces and leaving the flank completely exposed. On the right flank, the Numidians, known for their speed and maneuverability, avoided a direct confrontation with the Roman cavalry. Instead, they used harassment tactics, drawing their opponents away from the battlefield and weakening their cohesion. After securing the left flank, Hasdrubal directed the heavy cavalry toward the Roman rear, where it joined forces with the Numidian cavalry. This pincer movement completed the encirclement, trapping the Roman legions in a deadly circle. As the Carthaginian cavalry eliminated any possibility of escape, Hannibal's heavy infantry moved to execute the final blow. The veteran Carthaginian infantry, situated on the flanks of the center, moved inward upon receiving the signal from Hannibal. This maneuver trapped the Romans in a lethal funnel, where the Roman soldiers, compacted in their formation, could neither maneuver nor defend effectively. With the cavalry at the rear and the heavy infantry closing in from the sides, the Romans found themselves completely surrounded. This encirclement, known as a double envelopment, is considered one of the most brilliant tactics in military history. Unable to escape, the Romans were subjected to a constant attack from all angles. The Carthaginian soldiers advanced with lethal precision, while chaos and desperation consumed the Roman ranks. As the space to maneuver decreased, the Romans were trapped like in a mortal trap. Many died crushed by their own comrades, unable to even lift their weapons in defense. With Hannibal's trap now closed, the result was swift, and there were not many words needed. The Roman army faced one of the worst military disasters in ancient history. Trapped in the formation that had once defined them as invincible, the legions found themselves with no space to maneuver or fight. Within a few hours, over 50,000 Roman soldiers perished in a bloodbath that marked the darkest day for Rome during the Second Punic War. Hannibal's victory at Cannae was a pinnacle in his military career and one of Rome's most devastating defeats. This event not only solidified the legend of the Carthaginian general as a tactical genius, but also had a lasting impact on military strategy and the development of warfare in the subsequent centuries. Cannae became Hannibal's masterpiece, the definitive example of how cunning and meticulous planning could overcome a numerically superior and well-organized enemy. The double envelopment tactic employed by Hannibal was studied by generations of military commanders, who saw it as the epitome of battlefield strategy. This battle, though a terrible blow for Rome, both militarily and psychologically, also served as a lesson in resilience and adaptation for the Romans. They realized that their strength lay not only in the legions, but also in their political system, economic resources, and the loyalty of their allies. Subsequent military reforms strengthened Rome's tactical and strategic capabilities, marking a significant turning point in Roman military history. The Battle of Cannae has been a subject of study for military commanders from antiquity to the modern era. Its influence can be observed in various campaigns and historical conflicts. In ancient and medieval armies, generals such as Scipio Africanus, who would later defeat Hannibal at Zama, learned from the tactics used at Cannae. Scipio applied a similar strategy by using enveloping movements against the Carthaginian forces. Napoleon Bonaparte, the French strategist, deeply admired Cannae's tactics and used it as inspiration for several of his battles, continually seeking to surround and annihilate his enemies. World War I and World War II. During World War I, the concept of battle of annihilation, inspired by Cannae, was attempted, although the conditions of modern warfare made it difficult to replicate this type of tactic. In World War II, Operation Barbarossa, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, incorporated elements of a large-scale enveloping maneuver, albeit with mixed results. Modern strategic studies. Cannae is taught in military academies worldwide as a classic example of how a smaller, numerically inferior army can defeat a superior opponent through masterful tactical planning. The battle remains a potent symbol of military strategy, showcasing the potential impact of innovative leadership and battlefield cunning. After the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal Barca's decision not to march towards Rome after his apparent decisive victory has been a subject of historical debate for centuries. Several strategic, logistical, and political factors explain why he did not seize the opportunity to attack the capital of Rome. 1. Diminished army. Despite his victory at Cannae, Hannibal's army had suffered significant losses over the years, and the remaining troops were exhausted after years of campaigning in Italy. He lacked the manpower and supplies necessary to sustain a prolonged siege of a city as well defended as Rome. 2. Limited support from Carthage. The political elite in Carthage did not provide Hannibal with the reinforcements he needed to consolidate his position in Italy. While he sent messages requesting additional troops and resources, the government in Carthage was more concerned with protecting its territories in Africa and Spain, rather than committing more resources to his Italian campaign. 3. Fortifications of Rome. Rome was well protected by strong walls and a well-trained garrison. A direct siege would have been extremely risky, especially without adequate siege equipment. Moreover, time was not on Hannibal's side. A prolonged siege would have allowed Rome to regroup and launch counterattacks. 4. Fabian strategy. After Cannae, Rome adopted a strategy of avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal, wearing him down through guerrilla warfare and denying him the necessary resources. This Fabian strategy, led by Quintus Fabius Maximus, created a situation where marching on Rome was not a viable option for Hannibal. 5. Unstable alliances in Italy. After Cannae, some Italian city-states and Roman allies defected to Hannibal's side. However, these alliances were unstable and depended heavily on the Carthaginian military presence. Hannibal chose to focus on consolidating his control over southern Italy, securing resources and allies before attempting a larger offensive. 6. Pressure on other fronts. Rome continued to fight on other fronts, such as Spain and Sicily, where the conflict with Carthage also required resources and attention. Hannibal knew that a direct attack on Rome would not resolve the war as long as the Republic remained operational on other fronts. 7. War of attrition. Hannibal seemed to believe that Rome would collapse politically if it suffered enough defeats and lost the support of its Italian allies. Instead of marching on Rome, his plan was to gradually undermine the Republic's power base. However, he underestimated Rome's ability to reorganize and maintain its allies under control, even after disasters like Cannae. 8. A cautious general. While audacious in battle, Hannibal was a prudent strategist who rarely took unnecessary risks. Launching a direct attack on Rome without adequate resources would have been an extremely risky move, inconsistent with his leadership style. By not attacking the city directly, Hannibal allowed Rome to recover. In the following years, Rome reorganized its forces, adopted new strategies, and eventually took the war into Carthaginian territory under the command of Scipio Africanus. Many historians argue that advancing on Rome could have been the decisive move Hannibal needed, but they also acknowledge that the logistical and political circumstances made such a course nearly impossible. Now, I want to listen to you. What do you think about Hannibal's decision not to march on Rome? Do you think it was a prudent strategy or a mistake that sealed the fate of Carthage? And what other lessons do you think we can learn from this battle, even in the modern world? Leave us your thoughts in the comments. Which lesser-known historical battle would you like us to explore next time? We love reading and debating with you. If you're passionate about military strategies, ancient history, and legendary figures like Hannibal, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss our next episode. We look forward to seeing you in the comments to continue exploring together the great moments that shaped the world. See you next time.